Hey HTD and welcome back to Satisfactory. Last time around we built this awesome facility that completely replaced our starting facility, or at least part of it. We are now making a huge amount of iron rods and iron plates in such a way that we can easily scale up production if that's what we want to do at some point, but for now I think that this will do. And today we are going to expand on this project by basically replacing all the items that we're now missing in our production chain. Now don't worry, we already made builds for the different things before, so I'm not going to go through all of those steps over the last 10 episodes and completely redo all of those, but I am going to show you what I've built and how I kind of laid that out and what my thought process behind that was. And as you can see, I continued with the raised belts, and the foundations make sure everything is perfectly aligned between every single part of our facility. So even though this is built quite a bit further away, everything is still aligned to the world grid. Now, when it comes to the facility itself, it's quite straightforward. We have concrete going out into a storage facility, and I've started to use doors to make sure I can get in and out my facilities. There is a very similar build to what we've done last time inside, and as you can see, it's very easy to still get around in this facility. But for the next few builds, we're going to have to do some more complicated stuff. Well, first things first, I rebuilt our hub, and I replaced it in such a position that it's a little bit more central than where it was. Now, given the fact that we have our concrete facility over there, our iron rods and plates facility over there, and as you can see in the distance, our steel facility over there, this is sort of central, but it's also sort of out of the way because I do want to utilize a large portion of this space for the next few builds. Now, I did another, I think, interesting thing, and that is I set up a sort of central storage over here. Now, before you start shouting at me, I realize these things are not going to fill themselves, so it's not an automated central storage. But it does have all things like plates and basically all the basics that you're going to need to build stuff. And it'll take you quite a while to actually deplete these in this part of the game. I'm not sure if that ramps up at some point. Hi, Bob. But this is way more than you need. And to be honest, a resupply run for this thing is going to take me way less time than running around all over the place every time I actually need some sort of item. So, yep, I think that will work for now. Now, what is the plan? If we look on the map, we have this raised area over here that's conveniently close to the two facilities that we just built. And I think that we are going to basically rebuild our intermediate products there, so the rotors and things like that. Now, I don't want to kind of just repeat the same building over and over again, so this was pretty straightforward, this as well. And I do want to make sure that we're kind of using a similar-ish build in terms of how we construct them, because honestly that just saves a huge amount of time not having to figure out how everything is supposed to fit together every single time around. But at the same time, just plopping down the same box over and over is not going to be all that interesting. So what I want to do is I am going to combine several items into one build. The nice thing is that these higher tier items are actually produced in much smaller quantities anyway, but they also use some of the same input, so we can get kind of fiddle around with some of the belts. I have to think a moment to figure out what I'm actually going to do and how I'm going to place that, but it should be fun. Okie dokie, we have some work to do. I did some planning and thinking and fiddling around with how I would exactly want to build this. And first of all, I'm gonna say there should probably be a special place in hell for screws, because we're going to need so much of them. We can actually make more than enough of them for now, because we have this awesome rod facility in the back. I'm just saying, you need ridiculous amount of screws for everything. Guess that makes sense when you're building factories, but still. Okay, so what we're going to do is we are going to build ourselves a screw facility over there in the left corner. Now, that is actually going to feed into a rotor facility as well as a reinforced iron plates facility over here. So that this building is basically going to combine both of those items in one building. Just like I said, to have some alternative looks. And I'm also going to build these buildings relatively close together because of course they kind of feed into each other, and that kind of gives us a little village type of feel over here. Now then, those buildings are going to feed into a facility over here that is going to make the modular frames and the smart plates. Both of which we are going to scale up compared to what we've been doing so far, just to make sure that we have enough to actually feed back into our foundry facility over there that is also making some of the higher tier items that actually need the modular frames. So right now those are not being produced, and we definitely want to make sure we pick back up on that. But before we can do that, we have some work to do. Oh, by the way, this middle part over here is going to be not necessarily a main bus, but I do want to make sure I leave enough room between buildings to make sure I can use that for transportation. Now, for now, I'm actually inclined to do this with belts. But to be honest, at some point I might change my mind and transform that into trucks. Maybe just for the exporting out of this little village. Because of course, using trucks inside such a small area is going to be a nightmare. But if we, for example, want to transport the modular frames again to the facility over there, we could once again use the trucks. So, I'm not entirely sure about that just yet. Let's take it one thing at a time. Let's start with some screws. Now this screw facility over here doesn't look like much just yet, but we'll pretty it up in a moment. But first things first, I do want it to be functional. And because we're figuring this out as we go along, I do want to make sure that I build it first, make sure it works, and then we start covering it up with walls and make it look pretty. Now for exactly that reason, that means that I'm actually going to have to make sure we get in the rods exactly where we want them. And that means we need to start constructing our main bus, or at least what we call our main bus at this point in the game. Hey Bob, welcome to our new facility. Isn't it awesome? I think so. So, the setup of our main bus is quite simple. We are once again using these basically these concrete pillars to make sure we can walk under it very easily. We don't have to jump over things and stuff like that. Generally speaking, just like the look of it, although it's well, to some extent it's going to get a little bit spaghetti at this point. I really want at some point to replace this by something like trains or something, but I don't think trucks are really going to cut it. Although we could actually do that. Yeah. No. Okay, anyway, let's see. So we have the concrete over there, we have the rods and the plates over there, and then we are trying to bring them up in such a way that it looks kind of organized and looks kind of neat. So all in all, I'm pretty happy with how this looks. We're bringing them up there, and then we kind of have the highway of our basic resources in order to beef up our next facilities. Now, with these builds taking probably like 10 or 12 hours by the time I'm done, and half of that is me because I keep fiddling around with trying to make things look better, optimizing it, etc, etc. But that also means that I can't really show you the entire building process because that would make way too long videos. So, I'm just going to show you some steps in between and also talk you through what I ended up with doing. With regards to the screws factory, I forgot to mention, I think, that the front row here is actually feeding to the right, so you can see the output going down here, and the back row is actually feeding out on the other side, and that's intentional because we need screws in the two different places. Now, first things first, so this belt is going down here all the way to the other side. Ignore all the towers that are all over the place because I'm in the building process now, and they quite neatly fall into this whole elevator situation over there. So we are making reinforced iron plates here. So that's what the second belt is. It's the plates belt. And I must have tried out at least a dozen or so ways to actually lift these up in such a way that we could kind of walk in between and stuff like that. Other than the fact that I probably messed that up like half a dozen times. This is the version I settled on, and to be honest, it's probably the most simple version in the end, and you can technically still walk between the elevators, because if you zigzag kind of around, you don't have to jump over belts, but we are probably going to have to pretty that up and make it a little bit better in order to traverse across our facility, but we'll leave that for the stage of the build where we're actually going to make things look pretty. For now, this is very functional, and I do like the way it's organized, so it has that going for it. Now, in terms of the rotors, the reinforced iron plates over here, they are feeding, half of them are feeding down the back over here, and then they're combining with the other half down here. Now we have this outgoing belt here that kind of goes into nowhere. That's just a placeholder, just so I remember that that's the place stuff comes out of the facility at the moment. Now right next to that we have a rotor facility. We actually didn't fix the inputs yet. I'm going to do that in a moment, but we're going to have, of course, the screws going in there. So that's the other half of the screws. There's just one problem with that. It's not exactly half of the screws. We are using 240 screws per minute on the left side, and we're going to need 300 screws per minute on the right side. And of course, 300 is more than we can fit on a belt. So let me show you what I did in order to fix that. So here we are in the belly of the beast, and as you can see, we have a very similar situation going on with these elevators going through the floor, with the difference being that these are actually holes in the floor rather than just straight up elevators like we did in the previous build, and the difference being that I actually use 2 foundations wide room in order to do this. You don't actually need these 2 spaces. You can actually tighten in the belts a little bit more and do it like that, but I prefer doing it this way because it makes it really easy to get around and under your facility. And again, we want to be able to upgrade this at some point, so then we need to be able to access the belts without having to tear half our facility apart. Now, we mentioned the whole screw situation, and this belt is actually going through the back. And yes, the only reason I now have wall mounts purchased from the awesome store is because I needed to do this and I wanted to make it look pretty. And we feed it in this merger here in the back, and then this one is actually feeding up over here. And we actually have this whole splitter merger situation going on. So we actually have 2 of these elevators feeding up the screws up here, merging, oh, sorry about this, merging into this one over here, and then feeding into the last facility. Now, it does need to be the last facility because remember, we are getting in a full belt of screws over here. So these first 2 rotor facilities are going to use the majority of those screws, and then the last one is going to be a little bit starved. So this is where we're combining those 2 belts into one, and then that should be exactly enough to have this working at optimal speed as well. It also means that there's no point in actually storing screws anywhere because we're using the entire amount of 2 full belts that we're actually producing. Now, in case you're wondering what I'm spending so much time fiddling around with, well, this is a very good example. I was looking at my belt work, and I was like, hey, that's not what I wanted to do. I said I wanted to make sure we could easily walk around while I was jumping over all kinds of belts that I put on the floor once again. So I went to work and I made sure we erased all the incoming belts and outgoing belts from the floor, so we can now once again easily run through our base without having to jump over anything. Now, to be honest, I really like the looks of this as well, so that's a bonus as well. And if you were wondering again what you can actually fiddle around for a long time with, is being obsessed about the fact that I wanted these sloping belts to slope down exactly in the same way, and initially I connected them straight into the splitter over here, and then of course this one slopes a little less steep than the other one does, so I ended up removing that, replacing it, and so on and so on. But I do think that the end result of doing this is making for a much better looking base, and not to forget a much easier to walk around base. Anyway, well, let's get on to actually doing something that improves the production of our facility rather than the looks. Which brings me to the last part of our updated starting facility, and that is the modular frames and the smart plating. Now, I was actually just intending to kind of build that in a similar style as these other facilities, but I'm actually wondering, we used kind of a similar style in terms of how we are transporting the resources into the base as we did in the earlier versions where we have a single belt. We kind of just doubled up on that and did a similar horizontal version here, at least horizontal in the sense that they are next to each other, these belts. I'm actually thinking maybe we should try going a little bit more vertical here, and that will of course mean this building is going to be a little higher than everything else. At least I think it will need to be higher in order to make sure that all fits. But to be honest, that could give us a little nice change of pace in terms of how it looks as well. And remember, of course, we are still going to have to pretty this up with walls and stuff like that. But first, once again, we are going to build it. So let's see how this looks when we take things vertical. And that looks something like this. And quite honestly, I think I might actually prefer this vertical style of building for a couple of reasons. I like how the resources come into this particular setup a lot. I need to place down a whole lot of splitters, but it seems really organized. And if you're wondering why there's two belts going out, these are the reinforced iron plates and the rotors going in here and being split up, because we don't actually need all of them in here. We only need about half of them in here. Actually a little bit more than half, but we will get overflow and things like that happening. So I didn't actually balance this with all kinds of splitters, which you could argue I should probably do if I would want an optimal input from the start, but I haven't done that. But yeah, so I really like this setup. It's really compact. It is really neat. Initially, I was a little bit worried that this might be hell to upgrade, but actually, if we go down here in this corner, we can actually go under it. We can reach all the belts. We can see everything. We can upgrade everything. The only problem could be the elevators, but you can reach those from the top. So it's still sufficient in terms of my conditions that it should be easily upgradable. It's really compact. Like I said, I really like this setup, and I really like how neat it is on the outside as well. So yeah, this is actually a tower right through a belt. Don't worry, the tower is going to go away. And the only downside with this is that because these belts are under each other, you at some point need to shift elevation on your incoming belts as well. So you can see I've done that here. It looks a little bit wonky. So if you have a better way of doing this, let me know in the comments. But honestly, I'm not that bothered with it. It's only this little corner that's a little bit wonky, but it still looks fairly organized. Now I look at it, I should probably move these two pillars one step to the side. And the corner might be even neater than it already is. But what else? So we have the outputs. So we have some smart plates and we have some modular frames. So we actually have more modular frames than smart plates, for the simple reason that, as far as I can tell, we don't actually need that many smart plates after we actually did the elevator thing, and we've already done that. So not entirely sure if we're going to need a lot more, but considering how much time it takes me to build everything, we're going to have enough of that anyway. We don't really need a lot of these for buildings. Now, we do actually need the modular frames for some of the buildings, but we also are going to need those in this facility over here in order to make the next tier of items. So we definitely know for sure that we're both going to need a little bit of surplus of modular frames, as well as some of them for future items. Now, as you can see, there's a belt going in the back over here, all the way in here, and that's going to output here. And what I was actually thinking is that, considering we have all the outputs coming kind of together here, and we also can extend this this bus, if we can call it that, all the way through here, the placement of all these belts should be in such a way that we can still have the other belt go over it. What we can actually do is kind of build a small resource storage hub over here. It's probably going to be temporary because, as you know, we're probably going to have to expand and reiterate on that. But for now, that means that we are producing most, not all, but most of the resources at a decent level, and we're also bringing them all together in one place, so that is just very convenient. So let's see if we can get that working. And this is what that could look like. So we have all the different items that we're producing in this facility in here, including the iron rods, iron plates, and concrete, which we are bringing through the completed bus now, in such a way that this bus is actually an uninterrupted straight line on the same height throughout this entire facility, going into a straight line storage raised facility. Now, so storage raised facility, that's not a word. Anyway, you get what I mean. So it's basically one straight line from start to finish, and everything else, it looks a little bit spaghetti, but that's something we can't really avoid considering we have so many items coming in here. are going into these other storage facilities over here. And to be honest, it does look a little bit spaghetti-ish, but to be honest, it's not really, because it's all going pretty much into the most direct way into the storage facility that I can make it right now. And we are still meeting our target of being able to easily walk around, so everything is actually still raised from the ground. That does have the slight disadvantage of actually having to go up a ladder in order to access the storage containers, but yeah, I decided to just leave them raised because, to be honest, it looks kind of cool. Now we could also figure something out with something like walkways or whatever, but to be honest, this is probably not going to be here for that long. Famous last words. So I'm just going to leave it as it is. Now, we are not quite done yet. We have a functional facility now, at least that's what I hope we have. We're going to have to find out if everything is actually working like intended. But in order to do that, there's actually one thing that I really dislike about this game, and that's that we actually have to power everything up. Considering power usually goes on things like walls and stuff like that, I'm going to first place down all the walls, the roofs and stuff like that, make it look pretty, power everything up, and then let's see if it actually works. And there we go. I think this turned out pretty well. Rather than going for another box-like build, I figured, well, let's just take a different approach this time around and kind of go for an open roofed type of factory. Now, honestly, I wish I had some of the stuff in the shop unlocked already, because there's a couple of nice little iron frames and stuff like that that I think would fit in here very well. But sadly, I'm completely out of coupons, so we're going to need some more of those, and I've already spent quite a few coupons on stuff. But anyway, let me walk you through what I've done. So, you know the facility, I've showed you that, but of course I made sure I powered everything up. I tried to use the back walls here as much as possible to kind of keep it out of sight. I also put in some walkways and some stairs here and there. Now, I intentionally kept all the walkways and stairs on the sides rather than in the front. So this is basically just a whole industrial area where you have all the belts going in. We use some of these nice little belt walls, gaps in the walls. What are these called? I keep forgetting that. Now I need to know. Now I need to know. Where are they? Where are they? Conveyor walls. That's what it's called. Okay, so conveyor walls. They make it look pretty nice. So all in all, it looks pretty nice and clean. There's a few clipping issues. Now, honestly, I don't actually mind this one, because this sort of makes sense. I mean, it's just a ladder on the outside. But there's a few other minor clipping issues that I won't go into, but all in all, that might be a good argument to kind of make sure that we don't build the facilities too close to the actual sides of the building. Look at all those screws. Anyway, in terms of the walkways, let me just quickly walk you through a part of my facility in order to show you how that works. So, for example, over here I have a nice little walkway in between all these conveyors. Now, that actually works really well, and this connects back up to a walkway over here that kind of goes around in the back, so I can easily access the power and things like that. So, yeah, I really like the layout of this. Now, when it comes to the assemblers, we have a pretty much a little bit more boring setup, honestly. But there is still a walkway in here in the middle, so we could actually easily power everything up. Now, let me cheat a little bit and get to the other side by doing this. Whee! Yeah, as you can see, I really like the open space. We don't really have to jump around the factory in terms of the belts and stuff too much. Over here, I took a different approach. I actually went with the walkway up, so you can kind of look over the assemblers. To be honest, this might be the cleaner version of this. We also have the power in the middle over here, and this is kind of a more horizontal approach. I think, having tried both, this is definitely my preference, so I might actually go and change the other facility up as well, but I just left them intact to show you the different things I tried. Now, as you can see, some of these belts are a little bit backed up. The speed is actually really slow as well. That's because I intentionally used Mark 1 belts here and there, because we don't really need the Mark 3 belts in order to save on resources. Honestly, I probably should not have done that. Or I didn't need to do that, let's put it like that, because I have way more steel than I can use. because the steel facility in the back has been still running at full speed. So we're going to have more steel than we can ever spend, at least as long as we keep producing some. You can see the plates coming out here, the rotors, and yeah, all in all, I'm really happy with how this turned out. We have a nice storage hub in the back. Now, there's actually quite a few things left to do before we can really progress, but that will need to be in the next episode. So guys, I really hope you enjoyed this one. Let me know in the comments what you think of this build, of this type of build as well. And don't forget that even though we kind of rebuilt stuff that we already had, we did double or triple or quadruple our production depending on the item. So it's not just rebuilding stuff, it's actually scaling up in the progress. And now, because we've set it up like this, it will be much easier to scale things up in the future in case we need to. We can just expand these already existing factories. For example, add another whole level in here and double everything up. Would actually look really nice, to be honest, but in order to do that, we're going to need some more better miners, better belts, etc. So that will be down the line at some point. Now, once again, thank you for joining. Don't forget to like and subscribe, and I will catch you in the next one.